diplomatic row between Turkey and the Netherlands has escalated.
Hollanda'da Nazi uygulamalarını hatırlatan diplomatik rezalet.
Premier Rutte de houding van de Turken totaal bizar.
Ve siyasi devleri olduğu geçmiş saatlerde
Turkey's president has escalated the war of words.
branding the fellow NATO member a Nazi remnant.
In just under a month from now, voters across Turkey will vote in a referendum on the future shape of their government, and by extension, how much power they're prepared to invest in President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So why is so much of the breaking campaign news coming out of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands? Because the Turkish diaspora in Europe could prove crucial to the outcome. There are as many as 3 million Turkish votes in European countries up for grabs. Erdogan is looking for a yes vote, which would lead to constitutional changes that would turn Turkey into a presidential system with Erdogan and the AK party he leads at the top. When some European governments denied the AK party permission to hold campaign rallies on their territory, the diplomatic fallout was swift. The subsequent war of words has been covered heavily by Turkish media outlets that back Erdogan, and these days that means almost the entire domestic television news industry. Journalists there understand that coming out in favor of a no vote is one thing, but to be too critical of the president leading the yes forces could cost them their jobs and land them alongside Kurds, Gulenists, and others Erdogan calls enemies of the state. Our lead story this week is about Turkey's political future, but our starting points are in the European countries where the campaign and the coverage are making news. A Turkish political demonstration on the streets of Rotterdam. Expats were protesting the Dutch government's refusal to allow the Turkish foreign minister to speak at a rally in the city when a protester was attacked by a police dog. As the images instantly made their way across Turkish news feeds, President Erdogan called the Dutch Nazi remnants and warned the government there not to interfere in Turkey's referendum.
Bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin. Bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin.
The president effectively wrote the next day's headline for Turkish news editors to cut and paste. And, across the board, they seemed happy to do so.
This is nothing new. After he said they will pay, Erdogan's Nazi remnants remark was the next thing to make headlines. They are used to reporting stories based on Erdogan's statements. They report in the same way, based on the same source. This goes beyond media control. It shows that the newspapers have turned into a tool of propaganda.
Propaganda aracı haline dönüştüklerini gösteriyor aslında bize.
İşte mesela demişler Nazilerin köpekleri.
I saw headlines and comments such as Nazi dogs and Wilders dogs. The Turkish newspaper Takvim singled out the Dutch Prime Minister using photos of him with a police dog, implying that he is a dog. The message was that this was an offense to Turkey and to the Turkish people.
Türklüğe bir hakaret olduğuna dair başlıklar vardı.
Sometimes our media behaves like the supporters of a football team. We cannot change our habits. So the fact that a number of media outlets use similar headlines does not mean they were written by one person, but that the case was perceived similarly by different segments of society. That proves that there is diversity.
There are diverse views on the subject. That of the AK Party Member of Parliament, the journalist with the pro-government paper, as opposed to the academic, a mass media specialist at Galatasaray University, and the columnist at an online news site set up by dissident Turkish journalists. The series of bilateral incidents over the AK Party's planned rallies got its start in Germany, where the Merkel government refused to allow gatherings in 3 cities earlier this month. But Ankara and Berlin had another issue brewing before that, with the arrest February 17th by the Turkish authorities of Deniz Yücel, a dual national correspondent based in Turkey for the German paper Die Welt. The charges relate to leaked emails his paper published from the account of President Erdogan's son-in-law. Yücel is accused of spreading propaganda and alleged links to the Kurdish PKK, a movement the Turkish government labels a terror group. Erdogan, despite the office he holds, is seldom shy to comment on cases that are before the courts.
Dedim ki o gazeteci değil, o terörist.
Bunun bir
We can safely say that this was a political maneuver. Erdogan and Merkel had met a short while before Deniz Yücel was arrested. And Merkel, for the first time in a while, criticized Turkey over freedom of the press. This is yet another example of Erdogan scoring political points by heightening tensions.
Critics are constantly saying journalists are being mistreated. In Turkey, there is the rule of law. Is a doctor above the law? Does he or she have the right to commit a crime? Does a member of parliament have the right to commit a crime? Does a journalist have the right to commit a crime? If Deniz Yücel committed a crime, it will be proven. If not, he will be released.
There are 6,000 journalists in Turkey accredited by the Directorate General of the Press, from The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Figaro, Le Monde, Al Jazeera. They are able to report, write articles and express their opinions without any restrictions. None of them are pro-Turkey, so why was it only the Die Welt correspondent who was arrested?
There are other media issues that stand between Germany and Turkey, including the case of Can Dündar, the former editor of Cumhuriyet. Dündar and a colleague were convicted last year of espionage after they published classified documents that they said revealed covert Turkish arms shipments to Syrian rebels. They fled to Germany. The Merkel government hasn't just allowed that. Its justice minister recently hosted Dündar at a reception. Dündar has also launched a Turkish news website from Germany, which the government in Ankara has blocked from being seen in Turkey, which was already among the world's leading jailers of journalists well before the crackdown that followed the failed coup last July.
Last year, Reporters Without Borders and Biyanet did research showing that 7 of the 10 most popular media outlets in Turkey, including television channels, radio stations and websites, are under government control. More than 150 journalists are in prison. What is striking about these criticisms in the pro-government media on restrictions on freedom of speech is that there is no mention of oppression in Turkish politics.
Doğan is one of Turkey's largest media companies. Last month, when one of its newscasters on Kanal D, İrfan Dihermenci, tweeted that he would be voting no in the referendum, Doğan fired him. And Doğan is hardly unique. The editor-in-chief of Turkey's most circulated newspaper, Hürriyet, was dismissed 2 weeks ago after publishing a story on unrest within the Turkish military.
Irfan Değirmenci has been presenting the news for the last 4 or 5 years at Kanal D. Maybe he's not getting ratings. Maybe people are bored of him. I don't know. You should ask the company. I cannot speak for them. If their managers claim they did this because of government pressure, then we have something to talk about. But as they have not said it, it is not necessary.
That argument is undermined by the fact that no news outlet that fires an employee over political pressure ever likes to admit it. Individual cases aside, the government has dispensed with an entire regulatory body, the Supreme Election Council, which was responsible for ensuring balanced news coverage when Turks go to the polls. That job now belongs to the broadcast regulator, RTÜK, which is populated with members appointed by the AK Party government.
During past election campaigns, there have been huge fines, especially at A Haber, a pro-government channel. It was fined by the Supreme Election Council many times. Since then, the pro-government media has been complaining. The purpose of this executive decree was to eliminate this problem and avoid scrutiny.
This power has been transferred to the Radio and Television Supreme Council, RTÜK, which is controlled by the AK Party. They declared it by emergency decree and did not feel the need to explain or justify it. We did not even discuss it in the media.
Because there was no parliamentary debate, no vote, no legislation, just an emergency decree in the midst of a referendum campaign. Now, with quaint notions such as balance and fairness set aside, the Turkish news media can, like their president, focus on the job at hand, making a compelling case for freedom of expression elsewhere.